Win big in 2023 with Team Sync from RotoBaller. Import your fantasy teams and sync your leagues. Get customized tools and tailored advice for your specific rosters and scoring settings, including live recommendations from the live draft assistant, free agent finder, and lineup optimizer. Sync an unlimited amount of NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL fantasy teams from all of the major platforms. Get a discount for any premium pass using my promo code KNUCKLER, KNUCKLER, one who throws knuckleballs. So folks, just visit rotoballer.com/radio. Makes a great gift to start rotoballing like a boss. And what's up, everybody? This is episode 103 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast, Tap That. This is Brady Grove, and we are looking forward to UFC 291 this weekend. And it's a big week in mixed martial arts. We were going to have Connor Bones Sloan on to talk about some news, some headlines that were in the news, some Ultimate Fighter stuff. He can't make it this week. We'll do that another week. But we have Cage Warriors 158 also happening on Saturday. Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Bud Crawford. That is also Saturday night. Bellator versus Ryzen 2 and Super Ryzen 2, which happens in the early hours of Sunday, but Bellator vs. Ryzen 2 happens on Saturday night as well. Folks, you can follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady. That's where I make picks for all combat sporting events, outside of the UFC. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast. Like, subscribe, leave favorable reviews. That's on YouTube and the Facebook page. I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord doing the weekly DFS/sports betting Q&A from 4 to 5 p.m. on Saturday leading up to UFC 291.
Break out the red panties.
And folks, it's late on Thursday night. Check out my interlude episode from this past week with Kevin Doyle Jr. That was fun. Love talking to quarterbacks in the alternative football world. Folks, UFC 291, it is a 12-fight event. It's going to be in Salt Lake City, Utah. Those people get rowdy for sports. It starts at 6:30 p.m. It is, of course, a pay-per-view. We were supposed to even have, there wasn't too many good stuff canceled. Paulo Costa got rebooked, that whole thing. But here's the card. We have a women's flyweight matchup between Miranda Maverick and Priscilla Cachoeira. Matthew Semelsberger against Eros Medic. Vinicius, and by the way, that was at welterweight. At flyweight, CJ Vergara against Vinicius Salvador. Welterweight again, Jake Matthews versus Darius Flowers. Roman Kopylov back in the octagon to take on Claudio Ribeiro. Derek the Black Beast Lewis in a heavyweight matchup against Marcus Rogerio de Lima. That's number 12 and number 16 in the world, according to Tapology.com. Another welterweight fight. There's a few more. Trevin Giles versus Gabriel Bonfim. Been a good run for the Bonfims, and Gabriel is 14-0. Michael Chiesa, everybody loves him except for Kevin Lee. Kevin Lee disrespected this man's mama. Michael Chiesa versus Kevin Holland at welterweight. Tony Ferguson versus Bobby Green in a legendary, you just know that fight's going to be entertaining. It's going to get eyes on it. I would, hate to see certain results out of it, but that is a lightweight matchup. Tony Ferguson and Bobby Green. The last welterweight matchup of the card, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson against Michelle Pereira. In the co-main event at light heavyweight, Jan Blachowicz against Alex Pereira. And with the Jamal Hill news, it's weird because I'm still not seeing, anywhere. Let me Google this real quick, see if anything else comes up. Bear with me 1 second because this warrants just one last look. Yeah, so the vacant light heavyweight belt is not going to be on the line in this light heavyweight fight between Blachowicz and Alex Pereira. who was the middleweight champion on his way up to light heavyweight. Who knows? He could be on his way to heavyweight at some point. But obviously, given the circumstances, that fight holds major implications for the light heavyweight title picture. And for the vacant UFC BMF title belt, it is the rematch between Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje. Let's get into it. Starting off with Miranda Maverick and Priscilla Cachoeira. Priscilla, the plus 235 underdog. Miranda Maverick, the minus 280 favorite. Priscilla's won 2 in a row. Unanimous decision where she landed 102 strikes on Yejeong Kim and a first-round knockout over Ariane Lipski. Her only loss dating back to May 11th of 2019. She did enter the UFC with 3 straight losses. Granted, one of those fighters was named Valentina Shevchenko, but wins over Gina Mazzani, Shanna Dobson. Not overly impressive. I am impressed with her last 2 wins. She did get subbed by Jillian Robertson back on December 11, 2021. Miranda Maverick, who is 9 years younger than Priscilla Cachoeira. She is coming off a loss to friend of the podcast, Jasmine Jazz DeVicious, who now finds herself in the rankings at women's flyweight. Miranda Maverick wins over Shanna Young and Sabina Mazo. Before the Jasmine loss, also lost to Erin Blanchfield, Macy Barber. She has a win over Jillian Robertson back in March of 2021. I just see no reason to think that this isn't like... I think Miranda is probably going to revert back to, what she usually does. I just don't see any logic for why Miranda Maverick is that heavy of a favorite in this fight. Priscilla wins. This might be a 50-50 fight. I think that is completely realistic. Smack plus 235. And I would go Priscilla by decision plus 650. And I think that's the best option, honestly. I don't think she knocks her out. But that's maybe the second most likely outcome. And, I think Miranda, if she gets it done, it's by submission. But that's usually going to be my pick for her and the likes of Jillian Robertson. Next up, we got Matthew Semelsberger and Uros Medic. Medic, the plus 175 underdog. Semelsberger, the minus 205 favorite. Let's start with Medic, who is the winner of 3 of his last 4. Has only lost to Jalen Turner back in September of 2021. 3 wins in the UFC, counting the Contender Series, all by knockout. The last win did come against Omar Morales. That was an impressive victory that saw him land 2 knockdowns. Semelsberger, shockingly only 1 year older. He's been doing a lot more losing. Granted, it was to the likes of Alex Morono and Jeremiah Wells. 1 win over Jake Matthews in that time. I like Semelsberger's volume. I do typically like that. I see why Uros Medic's just starting to make more sense. He just is, he's been on a good winning streak. His loss to Jalen Turner looks a little bit better since then. I think overall the most likely single outcome, I think Semelsberger by decision, which is at plus 330. I think ultimately that is more likely than Medic by knockout, which is probably the prop you'd pick for him. For some reason, there's not odds on that right now. But I don't know. I think Uros Medic is kind of on the border of a value at plus 175. I think, he's on his way up, even though Semelsberger, is only 1 year older. I think Medic maybe wins this fight 40 times out of 100, so plus 175, not horrible. Next up, we got CJ Vergara and Vinicius Salvador. Salvador, the plus 125 underdog. Vergara, the minus 155 favorite. All right. Salvador lost his last time out to Victor Altamirano. He does have 1 victory over Shannon Ross in the UFC by second-round knockout back in August of 2022. Vergara, on the other hand, is the winner of 2 of his last 3. Wins over Clayton Rodriguez and Daniel Lacerda. His 2 losses in the UFC, so I'll give him credit. 1, lost a fight with Ode Osborne where he actually outlanded Ode 93-79. He did get taken down once, loses by unanimous decision. The other loss was to Tatsuro Taira.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
That's how everybody feels against Tatsuro nowadays. Vergara, honestly, what I'm comfortable betting in this fight is Vergara minus 155. I think that what he has proven so far in his time in the UFC, the people that he has been in Lacerda and Rodriguez, I think that's enough, especially when you look at the quality of his losses. He's ultimately 3-2 in the UFC. I think that proves, I think he's at least worth 65 out of 100 against Salvador. So minus 155, I don't hate it at all. But the thing is, I wouldn't take these guys to win in any individual manner. I think, both are capable of decision and knockout almost on a 50-50 split. So that one's tough, but it's closely handicapped, so I think it's worth taking a straight-up victor. Next up, we got Jake Matthews and Darius Flowers in a welterweight fight. Darius Flowers, and for some reason, this is where you got to go to a separate part on bestfightodds.com. Flowers the plus 205 underdog. Jake Matthews the minus 245 favorite. Jake Matthews, always a guy when he is slept on and, is the underdog in a fight, you really got to be careful. But that's not the case here. Darius Flowers, 28 years old. 8 of his professional wins are by knockout. He has a Contender Series victory where he caused a shoulder injury from a slam against Amiran Gugaladze, August of 2022. He came to the Contender Series with 2 LFA victories. You love to see that. And he has professional boxing experience, though it doesn't look like a lot of it was done on the winning end. For Jake Matthews, it seems like this guy was way more active than he actually was. Loser of 2 of his last 3. The only win is against Andre Fiallo, who he knocked out in the second round. Granted, so September of 2020, it was a win over Diego Sanchez. Let's forget everything that and before. You're just talking, a loss to Sean Brady and a decision loss to Matthew Smellsberger, where, he got subbed by Sean Brady. He got, pretty thoroughly beaten by Matthew Smellsberger. Okay. His win over Andre Fiallo by knockout, that doesn't tell me, a ton. But I think that Jake Matthews is going to be way too crafty for Darius Flowers. I think Darius Flowers is very, I think that he has room to grow. He seems like he's a really athletic dude. His finish in the Contender Series, even though it was from an injury, it still showed a lot of things about him. There's a reason his nickname is Beast Mode. But this is a huge step up for... from the Contender Series to take on a guy as seasoned as Jake Matthews, a guy who has been in the UFC since June of 2014 and has shared the octagon with some, very well-known fighters in that time. So I think Jake Matthews wins this fight 75 times out of 100. I'm not touching a straight-up victor in this fight. I do, how does Jake Matthews do that, though? I think it's most likely Matthews by decision. Do you get a good value out of that? At plus 330? I think that's solid value. And then, next after that, I would go Matthews inside the distance minus 115. Maybe that is the better value. I think inside the distance, I think is enough of a catch-all. I think those are 50-50. Now, maybe Matthews, ends up getting the finish more often than that. I don't know. Maybe you go, that's a tough prop to call. I think they're about even in value terms. This is Darius Flowers' first fight in the UFC, and he is definitely no stranger to getting finished even before he got to this level. Next up, we got Roman Kopylov and Claudio Ribeiro. Kopylov. Kopylov is the minus 210 favorite. Ribeiro the plus 170 underdog. I will start with Ribeiro because Kopylov being a favorite, it kind of changes my thing with him. I feel like the last couple times or most of his recent wins, you've been able to get him in a good value. Him being the favorite kind of worries me with a guy like this, but also there's one prop that you can really hang your hat on with Kopylov. We'll talk about that in a second. Ribeiro, winner of 2 of his last 3. One win in the UFC, one win in the Contender Series. His only loss is a second-round knockout to Abdul Razak Al Hassan back in January of 2023. So this is going to be his 3rd fight of this year, and before the end of the 7th month. winning the Contender Series by first round knockout. And then he knocked out Joseph Holmes in the second round back in May of 2023. Then we got Roman Kopylov. He will actually be outreached in this fight by 2 inches. He is actually 1 year older. He lost his first 2 in the UFC to Carl Roberson by submission and to Albert Duraev by unanimous decision. Just got outstruck in volume. His volume just wasn't there the first 2 fights. And then he fights Alicia Di Chirico and Punahel Soriano. And he lands a third round and a second round knockout, landing a combined 141 strikes. So, fantastic last 2 performances for Roman Kopylov after a shaky start. But, here already, is Claudio Ribeiro maybe, of the Carl Robertson, Albert Duraev level? Sure, I think he's closer to the Soriano and Alicia Di Chirico level. I don't like Kopylov at minus 210 at all. And I think that if you're taking either one of these guys, you go by TKO knockout. It's how they have exclusively won their fights in the UFC. So I think that someone is designed to go to sleep in this fight, and maybe it makes them a little hesitant over the first couple of rounds. And I think it's important to note, too, that, Kopylov has scored a knockout in the third and the second, Ribeiro in the first and second. So, maybe the how long this fight ends up lasting determines who gets in the better position to land their knockout. Kopylov by TKO knockout, that's plus 120. Ribeiro by TKO knockout, plus 300. Hit it. I like Kopylov. I don't think that he should be that favored. I think that this is almost, I could see him at minus 125, minus 210. No way. And to Claudio Ribeiro.
Nick, one comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie. Come on.
No need to be scared in this situation. A win over Joseph Holmes, says a decent amount. And a lot of people can get knocked out by Abdul Razak Al Hassan on any given night. Next up, we got a heavyweight matchup between Derek the Black Beast Lewis and Marcus Rogerio de Lima. Oh, God. The Black Beast is back. It's been a rough stretch. Derek Lewis is the plus 190 underdog. Rogerio de Lima, the minus 225 favorite. Here's the problem. Derek Lewis, I love you a lot.
Don't do this. You cannot do this,
His last win is a first-round knockout over Chris Dawkins. Since then, and granted, it was concerning that he started to get knocked out 3 in a row. But then the way that he got handled very quickly by Sergey Spivak, it's not even close to the same level. Sergey Spivak would work Marcus Rogerio de Lima right now. But MRDL is extremely good at fighting his fight and exploiting weaknesses in fighters where he has a distinct advantage. Now, it's just like this is a pretty recognizable pattern of decline for Derek Lewis. The last win being against Chris Dawkins, being in December of 2021, and then the last one, the Curtis Blades knockout back in February of 2021. There's been a lot of knockouts since then. De Lima, winner of 4 of his last 5. Decision victory over Maurice Green, a knockout over Ben Rothwell. He's only lost to Blagoy Ivanov by unanimous decision in what was a statistically close fight. A rear naked choke over Andrei Arlovsky, and a unanimous decision victory with 3 takedowns over Waldo Cortez Acosta. It's not going to be the same as it was against Waldo, but I think that is the, what is clearest to me, I think, is that Rogerio de Lima is going to take the fight to the ground. I think that he can even do okay volume-wise in this fight, in the striking. I think he's obviously going to want to avoid that as much as possible. Why do it? Rogerio de Lima by submission plus 550, and by decision plus 600. Give me plus 550 on Rogerio de Lima by submission, best prop of the fight. Lewis by TKO knockout plus 240. I'll give that to you. I think if this goes to the judges' scorecards at this point in Derek Lewis's career, that it is not going favorably for him. I think, if this goes to the judges' scorecards, it's a fight where he was put on the mat at least, 3 times. And I guess I got to go, I guess I gave my numbers for how many I think all these guys will win out of 100. And for this one, Rogerio de Lima wins this fight like 65, 70 times out of 100. I'm not touching a straight-up victor here, but it's a bad matchup for Derek Lewis at this point in his career. Next up, we got Gabriel Bonfim and Trevin Giles. Trevin Giles is the plus 275 underdog. Bonfim, the minus 330 favorite. Let's start with Trevin Giles. Winner, actually, of 5 of his last 7 fights. 2 in a row. Decisions over Luis Sose and Preston Parsons. Got 2 takedowns against Sose, landed 55 strikes, and got taken on 3 times against Preston Parsons. 2 losses sandwiched in between to Dricus du Plessis. A second-round knockout in Michael Morales. Good quality losses. And wins over Roman Dolidze in that mix. The James Krause and Bevan Lewis of the world. James Krause. Jesus, man. Then we got Gabriel Bonfim, who is actually 5 years younger, born in 1997. 2 wins in a row, including the Contender Series, 2 first-round submissions, a Von Flue choke and a guillotine over Trey Waters and Munir Lazez. It takes a lot to beat Trevin Giles. Absolutely. The Roman win shows that, and the 2 guys that knocked him out in 2021 and in January of 2022, it says a lot. The Bonfims, I think that Gabriel Bonfim is the more spectacular of the 2 over Ismael Bonfim. Gabriel, I think that he wins this fight. I don't know about minus 330 when Trevin Giles, has been doing that much winning. I think ultimately the best prop of this fight, because I think Giles can take 35 to 40 of these fights out of 100. He's just that kind of fighter. He's tough for a lot of dudes on any given night with his skill set. Giles, by decision, plus 500. That is really good value. Bonfim by submission, plus 110. I think that's second place. Again, not touching a straight-up victor here, but Giles by decision makes that all worthwhile. Next up, we got Michael Chiesa and Kevin Holland. 5 fights to go at this point on the card. Michael Chiesa is the plus 120 underdog. Kevin Holland, the minus 140 favorite.
Break out the red panties.
Let's start with Michael Chiesa. Has lost 2 in a row now. Got subbed in round 1 by Vicente Luque, August of 2021. His last fight was November of 2021 when he lost a unanimous decision where he got taken down 5 times by Sean Brady. He did have 4 wins in a row. Before that, the first 2 were against Carlos Condit and Diego Sanchez. But then wins over RDA and Neil Magny by unanimous decision. And for a little bit there, he kind of found himself like maybe kind of a little bit outside looking in on the welterweight title picture. Now he's fighting Kevin Holland, who made the transition to welterweight. I believe the first one he did of that was either Alex Oliveira or Tim Means. And he's won 3 out of his last 5. 2 losses to Hamzat Chimaev and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. He got knocked out in the 4th round. He did land 119 strikes with 2 takedowns on Wonderboy. Wins over Means and Oliveira. That's a solid level of competition. He got a win his last time out. 3rd round knockout over Santiago Ponzinibbio. He landed 66 strikes, and he looked a lot more himself in that fight. I think that the chaos of UFC 279, the chaos of kind of, his rise and fall that was so quick at middleweight, I think he's back on track with the Ponzinibbio win. And he had a good performance against Wonderboy. He also just got picked apart. He landed 119 strikes. They just weren't the better strikes. And Hamzat was going to do that to almost anybody in the world at that weight class on that night. I don't think this is within Michael Chiesa's range anymore. It's been way too long. I think that the lack of activity, the fact that, he's been on his way down, it seemed like for a bit, got 2 quality wins, but that was now, over 2 years ago. So Kevin Holland, minus 140, I think he wins this fight 65 to 70 times out of 100. Hit minus 140. And as far as how he does it, I would just go inside the distance. Kevin Holland inside the distance, plus 110. Excellent value. I think at this point in Chiesa's career, too, and with how Holland is on a fight-by-fight basis, why try to hit an exact target? Plus 110 for inside the distance is excellent value. Next up, we got Tony Ferguson and Bobby Green in what will surely be a legendary and, hopefully not, but possibly sad lightweight title fight.
One comment, man. One comment.
Oh, don't be scared, homie.
Not a lightweight title fight. It was the for the belt of all the things that I said, describing it leading up to it. Tony Ferguson finds himself the plus 310 underdog. Bobby Green, the minus 380 favorite. If I told you how many years ago that this would be the case at some point, what would you think?
But I'm not impressed by your performance, and I look forward to...
Let's talk about Bobby Green first. He actually hasn't won since February of 2022, a unanimous decision over Nasrat Haqparast. It was a 2-fight winning streak that started off with a first-round knockout of Al Iaquinta. You look at the guys that this guy has lost to, dating back to Thiago Moises, Rafael Fiziev, Islam Makhachev, Drew Dober, December of 2022. He got knocked out. Last time out, it was a no contest that ended early with Jared Gordon. It was a bummer. That was going to be, a good fight and a close fight. So that was a real shame. Tony Ferguson, oh God, man, has lost 5 in a row, dating back to May of 2020. Got finished 3 times in that stretch. He was on a great winning streak before that, naturally. Before the interim title fight with Justin Gaethje. I mean, an insane winning streak that included Edson Barboza, Rafael dos Anjos, Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, and Donald Cowboy Cerrone. Now he has lost 5 in a row to Justin Gaethje by knockout. Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush, guys who, the statistics don't tell the full story on those 2 fights, but he got worked. Then he got knocked out with that sick front kick knockout in the second round by Michael Chandler, May of 2022. Then, after what was a decently close fight, he does get finished by Nate Diaz, who outstruck him 101-80 back in September of 2022. It's like, it's just the fact that Bobby Green has been fighting and has been fighting regular fights, not these giant hyped up matches. The Islam Makhachev one was kind of a big deal. But, he's just been grinding, and he fights good fights. He lands in volume. I don't know if that is, he hasn't beaten anybody of Tony Ferguson's, name caliber. The question is, what is left of Tony Ferguson? It's sad to ask. To Tony Ferguson, it's the, 2 fights in 2022. That's not that bad. It's just that he was fighting Michael Chandler and Nate Diaz. Bobby Green being a minus 380 seems kind of crazy, but I think that ultimately makes sense. I just don't even know what to bet on this fight, because Green by TKO knockout, does he do that to Tony Ferguson? That's plus 165. I could see that. Green by decision, that's plus 120. The odds makers agree that both those things are very, very possible. Tony Ferguson at all, his last victories were 2 knockouts. Does he do that to Bobby Green? Maybe that is how you think it happens. And Ferguson by TKO knockout is plus 1100. The odds for this are all over the place, man. I think you still have to give Tony the credit of at least winning 30 to 35 of these fights out of 100. He's, not that far set. He's obviously looked bad, but that was against the best guys in the world. Bobby Green is not that. He's a very tough fighter, but very vulnerable if you're at a certain level. I have no idea what to bet in this one. It's all over the place. I would steer clear and just enjoy yourselves what will probably be an absolute barn burner.
Break out the red panties.
Next up, we got 3 fights left. One is a welterweight fight between Stephen Wonderboy Thompson and Michel Pereira. Pereira, the plus 125 underdog. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, minus 145, the favorite. Let's start with Pereira, winner of 5 in a row against Zelim Imadiev by 3rd round rear naked choke. And then decision wins 4 in a row against Chaos Williams, Nico Price, Andre Fiallo, and Santiago Ponzinibbio. He didn't get any finishes in those last 3 fights, in the last 4 fights. But in the last 3 fights, he combined for 217, I think it's 309 strikes against Price, Fiallo, and Ponzinibbio. And he landed a combined 4 takedowns throughout that stretch. So, a very good stretch for Michel Pereira. And the 4 names of Chaos, Nico, Fiallo, and Ponzinibbio, paints a pretty clear picture of a quality of fighter in this division that he is at least better than. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, winner of 3 of his last 5, but it's the activity level. Those 2 wins that, round out that 3 out of 5, Vicente Luque and Jeff Neal, unanimous decisions where he looked great, landed a combined 300 strikes. But that was back in November 2019, December of 2020. He took 2 unanimous decision losses to Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad in between that in 2021. He got taken down a combined 10 times in those fights. And then Kevin Holland, he outstruck him 163 to 119, tuned him up on the feet, did get taken down twice, but landed a 4th round knockout. It makes a lot of sense to me. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I think, is still beyond the level of Michel Pereira. Wonderboy, the wins that he has gotten, the Kevin Holland win, Michel Pereira has done work volume striking the last 3 fights, and, he's landed a few takedowns in some fights, but that was not against the likes of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Pereira has never fought a guy that keeps his distance and moves in and out like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson because he hasn't fought this specific guy. So you can't prepare for that, and you can't beat him unless you have, some world-class advantages that I just don't think are there. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I think, wins this fight by unanimous decision. I think he lands, this might be 140 to 100 on the striking numbers. I think that it really could be. So Wonderboy minus 145. I think he wins this fight 65 to 70 times out of 100. Take minus 145. Hit it. And then I would go Wonderboy by decision. That is at plus 140. And because that's how Pereira's last 4 fights have gone and all have been wins, I think Pereira by decision plus 275. I think that's an excellent value too. Next up, we've got 2 fights remaining. We're making excellent time this evening. And we are on to the light heavyweight non-title fight between Jan Blachowicz and Alex Pereira. I guess that means this. It's so weird that this is going to be a 3-round fight. 3 rounds. Unbelievable. Jan Blachowicz, the minus 1. This is pick'em at minus 110. Okay. So this would have been a fun one to discuss with Connor. Let's just real quick talk about what has happened for these guys lately. Jan Blachowicz was in that weird title fight, not a title fight, that ended in a draw with Magomed Ankalaev. He had a win over Alexander Rakic by 3rd round knockout May of 2022. God, a lot has happened since he beat Dominic Reyes and then Israel Adesanya. Lost the belt to Glover Teixeira by 2nd round knockout. What a run for Jan Blachowicz has been. He was born in 1993, by the way. This man is 40 years old. Alex Pereira, not that much younger. He was born in 1987. He has a 79-inch reach compared to Jan's 78-inch reach. For Pereira, the winner of 4, he won 4 in a row. And it was against Andreas Michailidis, Bruno Silva, Sean Strickland, and Israel Adesanya. That last time out, November of 2022, he knocked him out in the 5th round. And then against Israel Adesanya, last time out, he was winning the fight, gets knocked out in the 2nd round. Israel reclaims the belt. So wild. Already, a legendary rivalry in the history of the UFC and combat sports. The memes that it's generated alone. Alex Pereira is not like Israel Adesanya going up to light heavyweight. Alex Pereira is going to be a full body 205 pounds. Israel Adesanya was outweighed on, at the weigh-ins by like 9 pounds by Jan Blachowicz. Pereira has the size to do this at light heavyweight. The question is, is Jan going to do what he did against Israel Adesanya and just go for the takedowns and control him on the ground because he's bigger? I think it's going to be a lot harder, and I think as time has gone on for Jan, I think there has to have been some deterioration. I think this is a fight where Jan is going to try to do what he did against Israel. It would be amazing if he came out with a victory on this, but he, ultimately didn't look that good against Magomed Ankalaev. And, I think that Pereira's kickboxing with his size is going to present a greater challenge than what Israel Adesanya offered at 205. Alex Pereira wins this fight 55 to 60 times out of 100 at minus 110. Hit it. Ow! And Pereira by knockout plus 165. Hit it. Ow! And I think Jan, if he wins this fight, I think it's kind of how he did against Israel, and I think it ends in a unanimous decision. And for Jan by decision, that is plus 350. That's a solid value. That's the best value for Jan among the props on that fight. And we are to the main event of the evening for the BMF belt. Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje in a lightweight rematch.
Break out the red panties.
This is going to be a banger. Everybody knows it. Get to your streams early, folks, because the internet traffic is going to be crazy. Justin Gaethje, the plus 125 underdog. Dustin Poirier, the minus 145 favorite. Let's start with Justin, the underdog, winner of 2 of his last 4. He was on a 4-fight winning streak before that. Names like James Vick, Edson Barboza, Donald Cerrone, and Tony Ferguson. A win over Michael Chandler in between. Winning over Rafael Fiziev, and I didn't think he won that fight, but it was very closely contested. That was March of this year. Losses to Khabib Nurmagomedov and Charles Oliveira in between. Hard to blame him for that. Now, his first 3 fights in the UFC was a second-round knockout over Michael Johnson. Then he got knocked out in round 3 by Eddie Alvarez. Then he got knocked out in round 4 and outstruck 174 to 115 by Dustin Poirier. Dustin Poirier, on the other hand, will have a 2-inch reach advantage. He is also 1 year younger than Justin Gaethje. Let's talk about what this guy was up to, dating back to, my God, Bobby Green, Michael Johnson, Jim Miller, Eddie Alvarez, Anthony Pettis. Then he beats Justin Gaethje. Another fight with Eddie Alvarez, and he gets the win that time. Max Holloway, and I forget how the first one was the no contest, but gets the second round knockout over Eddie Alvarez, beats Max Holloway at UFC 236 by unanimous decision, lands 178 strikes on him. His only 2 losses coming into this fight. Khabib Nurmagomedov and Charles Oliveira. Wins over Dan Hooker. 2 wins over Conor McGregor in that stretch by first and second round knockout. Of course, Conor McGregor grossly broke his leg in that third matchup. He got subbed by Charles Oliveira and Khabib Nurmagomedov. He got a third round rear naked choke over Michael Chandler. The similarities between these 2 guys is enormous. It's crazy how many coincidences it seems that there are in their great runs through the UFC. And to the top of UFC fan, the BMF belt is kind of a real thing. It's not for who the best is, but it's for who has the best pay-per-view draw. It's the champion of the pay-per-view draws. It is a real thing, and this is going to be a really big event. One thing I can say in Justin Gaethje's favor, Justin Gaethje, I think has been fighting a more realistic slew of guys. He gets the win over Michael Chandler, and it was kind of crazy before October of 2020, and the activity slowed down. But, he's out there taking fights with Rafael Fiziev, and, lands 103 strikes, gets a takedown, wins a majority decision. And Dustin Poirier, the win over Michael Chandler, but from after June of 2020, when he got the win over Dan Hooker, to July 2021, it was the whole Conor McGregor show thing. and loses the fight to Charles Oliveira in between. I like Justin Gaethje's activity level more. There's been more of it. He's fought in 2023. And I think it's just more of a, less distracting slew of opponents that he's had. Even though, these guys have only fought the best in the world. Dustin Poirier, I do think, is just the more well-rounded fighter. I think he's, statistically, based on what these two guys have done in their last, handful of years of fighting, I think Dustin Poirier will outstrike Justin Gaethje. I think he might get taken down a few times like he did against Michael Chandler, but Dustin is a much better grappler. He's going to be dangerous there, too. He's going to be able to get up, and I think that he's just going to have the crisper stand-up and land the better volume and do a ton of damage. And, he's a very smart stand-up fighter, as we saw in his approach against Conor McGregor. I just think he's the better mixed martial artist, and that says a lot because Justin Gaethje has taken violence and made it a beautiful, beautiful, disciplined art form. Dustin Poirier, minus 145. I think he wins this fight 65, 70 times out of 100. Anywhere from 60 to 70. 65 is a very safe number out of 100. Minus 145, hit it. And, how do these guys win? Will they even let this not go to a decision? This could get really violent. Either of these guys by decision. Poirier by decision, plus 350. Poirier inside the distance, plus 130. I don't know. I'd rather go by decision. I think this is going to be, but it's 5 rounds. I don't know. Maybe you just bet a straight-up victor here because anything can happen in this kind of fight. It's one that a lot of people who don't normally watch the sport are going to be talking about, and especially, in the aftermath, because there's going to be some memorable moments for this one. But, folks, that is it for the entirety of UFC 291, and this has been episode 103 of RotoBaller's official MMA podcast. Tap that. Folks, I will be in the RotoBaller MMA Discord from 4 to 5 p.m. on Saturday doing the weekly DFS/sports betting Q&A before the card. You can follow me on Twitter at RotoBrady, making picks for things like Spence vs. Crawford, Ryzen vs. Bellator, Cage Warriors, stuff like that. Follow the podcast at Tap That MMA Podcast. Like, subscribe, leave all sorts of nice reviews and comments on YouTube and on the Facebook page. Check out my interlude episodes. There's great ones, from the last few weeks. Great ones coming. Folks, have yourselves a great weekend. College football starts in a month. Thanks for listening. Enjoy a phenomenal combat sports weekend. Peace.
Break out the red panties.